Okay, you guys. So in here, it's been a little bit because I basically needed to figure out a few things first before we did this. So the problem was we wanted to create a carousel-like for our project, right? And I will show you that we did that and how we accomplished it. So basically I went and I looked React create carousel. Well, there was how to build an image carousel. And this uses its carousel component. And all it's doing is providing a URL for the actual image that it's switching on. So it's adding it to the component itself, but it's not really switching a component here. All this is doing is actually changing this image URL. And that is not what we want. What we wanted is to switch a component completely. So it's the same concept as what we're doing here, but it didn't really work for what we wanted. There was another way that I found that was to show and hide components. So I looked at a few of these sites that seemed like they might go where we wanted to, and basically all they really did was do a carousel for images, and I was just like, yeah, we don't necessarily want something like that. Now this was a little closer, right? This .state, they have an active index. They set the state for the next slide to the active index. For go to slide or go to previous slide, go to next slide. So that's kind of what we wanted. The issue I was running into is we needed to load a complete React component. In hindsight of this is a React component. It is, so yay. But I asked a question, and this leads us to stackoverflow.com is where I asked this question. In order to ask a question, you want to set everything up. So I said, hey guys, this is my file structure. I'm not sure how to accomplish what I want. I've looked online, right? And what I want is a carousel of different smaller projects. I don't want to scroll from one to the next down in my projects like we've seen in other resumes we looked at previously. Didn't really want that. We wanted to be able to click on a button and have it move to the next project. So I thought it would work. It doesn't work. I provided the code that I tried, right? Because I tried this originally on my own. Do not go to Stack Overflow and ask a question without having ever tried anything. Just don't. You're going to get really bad responses, and people are going to tell you that you're stupid or whatever else they're going to say. Just don't do it. So you're going to come over here. You say, okay, here is the code I tried. And after that I didn't in this case, didn't feel like I really needed it. But you can paste the error as well underneath it. Sorry. And then I told him how my application's working. I'm going through app.js, adding navbar, and then adding the main.js container. And that main.js container is supposed to have projects in it, and afterwards it should have like the about page projects or whatever else. So here we go. I asked this question about 20 hours ago. Look at that, I got a response about 20 to 19 hours ago. So within about an hour or so, I got a response. Now, there's a couple other things here. And they edited their code 8 hours ago for me. How nice of them, right? I think they were up way too late and had nothing better to do. I have no idea, honestly. I don't know what time zone they're in or anything else, nothing about their lives. So I'm just happy that they were able to help. So this is the code I originally tried. We created our class projects. We did a constructor. I set a state to a component, which was in my components array right here. Okay, so I created an array of components. I put curly brackets around each component, thinking I needed those, and then like, okay, here's the next component, etc. Right? Up above, which you don't see, I imported the components, of course. And then from here, I created my index here, just like they did on the other projects. When we hit the back button, we subtract from the index, do our logic to make sure that if we're less than the first item, we go to the last item. So we're rotating around in a circle, right? Same with the forward. We do our logic here. We add one if it's greater than, or if it's going to be more than the last one, we actually go back to the first one. And then here's our render, which was this.state.component, right? And what I was doing is I was changing the state of the component to a different component in the array, because the only way to re-render a component is to change the state. That's kind of React itself, right? If the state doesn't change, why should it re-render the component? So we changed the state in order to re-render the component. Well, this didn't work for me. It broke. It said that I was expecting a string and it had an object. So I'm like, I don't know. So here's my question in the end. Is there a way to replace a component on a button click, completely remove the original component and add the new component in? Here we go. Did you try this? Also on click this dot back rotate. Thanks, Chris G. See my answers below. Do you need it to be animated? And some more questions. Are there components already imported? Will they be passed by props, or do you also need dynamic component loading? So I was like, hey, dynamic component loading could be cool, or passing by props. Either way, doesn't really matter. So here's the answer. It breaks because the components array contains objects and React can't have that. Well, that's the error I got, so perfect. We're on the right track already. So instead of the brackets, which created it to be an object, we needed to just get rid of those curly brackets and put it right here. You'll also need to fix your back rotate and forward rotate handlers. They can't be string-like in HTML. So you'll notice right here, I did it just like HTML would do it for a button to JavaScript. Well, we can't do that. So what we need to do is curly brackets, this dot back rotate, or this dot forward rotate inside the curly brackets. Okay, fair enough. And then we also have to, as this says, bind it. So inside of our constructor, we now need to say this dot function equals this dot function dot bind this. It's a little convoluted looking, but it is super important. If you want, you can look at this function dot prototype dot bind. Anyways, let's go on. I don't want to make this one super long. Finally, you should make an index a state of your component. Okay. So what he does here is he does some static and default props. Says the component's prop type is any, right here for prop types. And then we do this default props to be our array. Inside the constructor, instead of setting a component here, we set an index. What does this do for us? Well, it gets rid of these two lines right here, okay? And now puts these two lines inside of this class itself as a state and props instead, which is basically better for us. We wanted that. And then right here, we grab the components prop and the index state, and we do our conditional logic and set the state to a new index, right? So all we have to do is change the state, and it will do our render method again, right? Well, the last part, which was working, but as we go along, it's clear and may be more supported to declare a capitalized variable containing the component, which is this line right here. So let's go back over to the finally. We re-render when we change the state, right? So anytime we call set state, React re-renders. Perfect. So it does the render. Const comp equals the props.component. Does the exact same thing as what I showed you just up there, just barely. And does the array on the index right here, right? From there, we then return it, button on click, back rotate, forward rotate, surrounded, of course, and then we have the carousel container. I did this div for sorry, just lost my train of thought. I did this div in order for the CSS to work later. We haven't touched any CSS at all at this point, but we will. So we're setting that up right now for future. And part of my question was, how do I do this with Redux? The answer to that part is right here. Redux won't help you with what the issue is, okay? Redux can help, but the problem that we were having was not Redux related. It was React related, and the fact that this was originally, right here, this originally I tried to put it as objects. One other comment at the very bottom, import star as components from ... may help you. So let's go ahead and look at the code, because I already made these changes. So projects, this is the code that we ended up with. I was looking at something about reducers, so don't worry about that for now. That'll be later in a different video that hopefully we can get Redux to work here, because that is our end goal. We want to be able to work with Redux properly as well, right? Because right now this is here, but it doesn't do anything for us. It's just sitting there. So here we go, just like you wanted. We did prop types right here in our default props. Inside our constructor, we bound the two functions, and our state is an index. Okay. From here, back rotate and forward rotate. Our const is the component's constant or index that we're using. And so if Now, just so you're aware, this const means it is a constant. It's read-only. You can't actually mutate it, right? This is a good thing. We don't really want to mutate our components. We don't want to mutate the state or any props or something like that. Remember, part of React is we want immutable. So this dot set state on our condition. So all we do is set the state to a new index, or we set it to this -1. And this is not mutating, it's taking what's there and it's creating this new state. That's all of this combined, right? A forward rotate does the same exact thing. And then as stated before, we do this component, and it's the props.components. Yeah, we could import just like this and then say this.state.index, but this creates one line instead of two lines. So we take our components prop, which is an array, as we see up here, components is an array, and then we say which index, right? And then when we click a button, we rotate forward or we rotate backwards. Okay, so I was playing with a few other things here as well. So let's just, for kicks, projects, I already have this running. Let's see what happens. Projects of undefined. I thought I solved this. Let's go ahead and undo and see if that comes up. About of undefined. This happens when you mess with too many things, right? So, taking the exact same concept as before, we apply it to here. We set a state, however, this state we're using a component with a string, okay? And then we are doing a switch on this component. We're doing a comp equals this dot props dot components. So our props component, and what happens here, why it's not working, is because I don't have our props component here. Right, so, and this is, I was messing with a couple things and didn't realize that I had it broken. We did this before the constructor. Usually you want to declare your global variables and such before you do your constructor. This is the import star as, we'll get to that in just a second. Components dot about and components dot projects. Not only that, but now we need to create this as an object. So an associative array isn't really a JavaScript thing, okay? It still turns it into an index. So we want to create it as an object instead. Let's go ahead and save that and see what happens. Look at that, it shows up. So let's change this now to projects, just for our previous example. It's because of this default. We're switching right here. Okay, here we go. As we see, this still works. We still get a winner. We can rotate to this one, add to do, and then go to the next, right? And rotate through. I only have 2 projects right now, so it's alternating, but if I had a third, it would add that in here as well. Back does the same thing. Both of them work properly. Perfect. Completed all. So there we have that. So we went over what we should do on asking a question on Stack Overflow if we need to. Sometimes, you know, the answers that we get aren't necessarily what we need to know. Usually, you don't need to do this because there are so many questions out there. I believe there's 50,000 people who visit, or yeah, I think it's 50,000 people a month visit stackoverflow.com, which is a lot. Anyways, so you should be able to get your answer without, and we're not too worried about these. These are warnings, so I'm not too worried about those for now. Anyways, so it works. So the last thing that I want to talk about for this import star as, I called it comps here. Notice I did comps.tic-tac-toe. It comes from this /project/index, which is this index. All we're doing is we need to import and export somewhere, right? So each project itself, I have an index in each project, which exports the default. So if we look at this tic-tac-toe example that we did, all the classes are together in one file that we originally called index.js anyways. So file name doesn't have to follow class name. And if you remember, this used to just say class game extends react.component. Well, I switched this to export default class tic-tac-toe. I could have left it as game, but it's tic-tac-toe, right? And just for clarity's sake in what we're doing, we want tic-tac-toe in case there's another game that we add, like say we added Battleship. Well, we don't want to be confused at which game we're playing, right? That one we'd call Battleship, this one we call tic-tac-toe. You could have them in a games folder if you wanted, but you wouldn't like call it game. You know, hey, let's play game. Well, which game? Yeah, exactly. So we want to have it declared a little bit better for our case, which is tic-tac-toe or Battleship or whatever. Now this exports. What we do here is we import it from that file, and then we're exporting as tic-tac-toe from it. Okay. The reason why is now we can come back over to projects. Apologize. And I did this. We're importing it all from index. Yeah, we could just do it here. Project / tic-tac-toe, project / to-do list, project / project 3, you know, project 3, project 4, project 5, etc., etc., right? Well, this seems a little bit more than what we need. We just want everything. We want every single project, right? So what we do is we create this index file inside of our projects folder. right here. Notice it's not in the to-do list or tic-tac-toe, it's just in the projects. We import and we export. Then we import everything from this one file. So now we only have one location we have to worry about adding new projects to. If we needed this exact same file inside of like our links, which we don't have anything right now, but we could do the same thing. Import star as components from /projects/index, right? We could do the same thing here and have it in two different places. Here and here, without worrying about doing 20 imports. All we'd have to worry about is making sure this file is correct and up to date. That's all this file is doing, is importing and exporting from one place. So we don't need that here, obviously. This links isn't doing anything for us at this point. Right now it's just there to say we're going to add it later. So basically our projects, as we go back, some React basics. We have a prop type. We create the default props as an array, and we will change this to Redux later, but for now I just wanted to get this working, right? And then we do a constructor. We bind everything. Remember, when we do a constructor, we need to pass props into the constructor and then call super props. We set the state for the index to be 0. And then here is the case of our logic. Remember, index is a const, so it's read-only. Same with this components. That's completely fine. So if index minus 1 is less than 0, so an array starts at 0 and then it counts up. 1, 2, 3, etc., right? In our case, we only have 2. Now, the array length is 2. Length is 2 of an array, okay? Of our specific array, this length is 2. Right here. However, this is index 0 and index 1. Okay, so that means what we need to compare off of is this 0. So when we're going backwards or we're subtracting from our index, if the case is that it's less than 0, instead of making it -1, -2, -3, right? What we want to do instead is set our index to the length of our array. But remember, we're 0 based, so we have to then go -1. Because if our length is 2, our length right here is 2, right? But this comps.todo list, its index value is 1. So length is 2 minus 1 equals 1. And that's our very last object. We don't have to care about the middle objects because it's just whatever it would set to, but we want to care about this special case. Now, if this is not the case where index -1 is less than 0, we just set the new state. Remember, this is still immutable because we're just creating a new complete state that's being returned as index -1. So this is a read-only, which would evaluate to 3 or 2 or 1. You know, in this case, it would evaluate to 1 -1, and it would return as a new state, completely new, 1 -1. for the index. We do the same on the forward rotate. If, again, we have our first special case, index plus 1, so if we add 1 to the index, and it is not just greater than, notice here we did less than, not less than or equal to, just less than. In this case we need to do greater than or equal to, because if we're already at, same thing here, our length is 2, but if we're already at our index of 1 and we try to add 1, we'd get a 2, right? Well, if we hit 2, that would be a third object. This would be index 2 right here, right? If we wrap that in an object, and obviously this is not valid code, but something right here would be index 2 in an array. And this is some just basic JavaScript itself and basic programming thoughts in general, okay? If that's greater than or equal to the length, because again length is 2 but our last index is 1, we want to set the new index to 0. So this is now, instead of adding 1, we go back to the very first index, right? Let's get rid of the code I just added before I forget about it and break things. And then if that's not the case, all we have to do is add 1 to the index. Easy enough, right? As soon as set state is called, it re-renders, it creates this and puts it right here. And before we get that error again, in JSX we, instead of just saying class equals like we would in HTML, we need class name equals. So there we have it. That's basically how we created our carousel. Not too difficult, right? A little bit of basic React. Now I then went along, and because we needed this inside of main, because remember we want to rotate through our different components inside main, right? Because app itself contains a nav bar, which we never really need to change. It's just there to click buttons and such. And then we create this container called main. That's why we have it in a container, not just a component. So here we go. In here we need to, for now we're only doing 2 different ones. We're going to have an about and a projects component, right? I do the same thing for the import here. However, I don't want to worry about the index, because in this case we're not rotating through an index, right? We don't need to rotate through an array that goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 3, 2, 1, 0, 3, 2, 1, 0, something like that. We can skip around wherever we want. And in the case of a page, it doesn't make sense to have it named as an index. So we want it to actually be the page's name, about. Right here, about, or projects. If we added later, you know, which we will eventually add that later, contact, components dot contact. We don't have that now, so we don't want to break our code, but that's what we would be doing. So we do the same thing as before. First, in order to do a prop type, we need to import prop types from the prop types right here. Notice this is all lowercase here. We import everything from our component/index, which again, if we look at components index, Same thing, imports and exports right here. We're going to have a few more of these later, just because we don't have any code inside of them. There's nothing to export, so there's nothing for us to import. But we will be doing that later. So here we are back. Now this is a little bit, I don't want to say trickier, just it's different. JavaScript doesn't have associative arrays, so we create this as an object, and this is one object, like value you could say, or variable called about, another variable called projects. And so we get the props component, or sorry, we get the components from the props, and we change this variable called the comp right here to which component we want. Okay. When you do a switch statement, so if I didn't have this, I could do lots of if else's. I could literally say if, you know, this dot state dot component equals about, then do it, else if this dot state dot component equals projects, right? But this is all the same thing as a switch statement. So we switch on something specific. This doesn't have to be a string. It can be like an index that we could have done, something like that. But we're not doing an array index, right? So, but we could switch on a number if we needed to for specific cases. And so this is saying what we're switching on. We do curly brackets, close the curly brackets, and then the cases. So the case of about. So remember, we have a string inside of our components. Projects. Right. So I switch on this dot state dot component. Remember that your spelling and all that needs to be exactly the same. Notice this is components with an S, plural, because it's an array of components, not just one single. This tells us which component it is. Then a case of about, we would switch it to this components about. Yeah, we could do it this way. This dot props dot components about. Shouldn't really matter either way though, right? Because we are declaring a const of components. I don't need to mutate this. I just need to be able to read this array. Or the object, I should say. It's now an object. It's this as an object, right? So there we have that. And all I would do right here is return that specific component. So in this case we have projects, and I do not have this set up yet because we're going to go over this basically the same time we do with the projects to create the Redux with this, right? And the reason why is because our app contains both navbar and main. Well, our navbar is what we're clicking on in order to change what shows up in main, right? In order to do that, we'd have to pass the props from app down to navbar, and then we'd have to pass it back up to the app and back down into the main for the new props that are supposed to be passed. And we can do that in pure React and it would work. However, Redux is maintaining our state for us, right? It's our single source of truth. So it's better if we do this in Redux for more readable, like better maintained code and such. So that's what we're going to do instead. So basically we're going to end there with this and go from there. So yep, here's what I was attempting. If we just did it pure React, we would need something like this with the pages here. We'd have to pass it down to navbar, and then navbar would pass it back up to app, and then it'd pass it down to main with the change, because our top component's what needs to store everything, right? Or contain the states and the props in order to maintain those. But we don't need to worry about that inside app. We care about it between navbar and main, so we will work on that next time and explain more of that next time as well. So this one's a little shorter than all the others. I'm sure you're excited about that. You can add a second project or a third project if you want. So go ahead, add a new folder. We can just call it project 3. And all we need is an index.js exactly like this. Not everything like this, but let's go ahead and copy it. Project 3, new file, index.js, paste. Now we don't need React to Redux, any of these. All we need is React. Export default class, project 3, return P, for a paragraph. Inside of here we'd say something like hello world, right? Remember that we now need to go to our, not the to-do list project, but our index.js inside projects, import project 3 from /project 3, export default as project 3. We don't really have to worry about the spaces. /project 3. I forgot the dot there. And then when we go into our projects, we just comps dot project 3 right there, right? And if everything works, create store is not defined, reducer, P is not defined. What? Shouldn't have to worry about any of those, should we? Let's just copy this one instead over to it. Project 3. Create that P. Hello world. Check 3. Project 3. Save. What error do we get? P is not defined. Well, it should be. Let's just do this. Project 3. Check 3. No, I think it's because I did capitals. And if we do something like this, let's see, there we go. 2, there's the hello world component, back, right? So if you want to add a second component for now, just like that, all you need is this right here, import the React, do a const, and export it. And you could even get rid of that line, export default right here, and it would also work. Should work. Project 3 is not defined. Well, it doesn't like that, does it? So we'll just leave it that way. That way, sorry. So const project 3 arrow function, and all we're doing is a return statement, so we don't need the brackets, right? We're just returning literally a div that has a span in it saying hello world. Even this you should be able to get rid of. And there you go. You can inspect your elements. Notice that we already have our carousel container. Right now it has a span called hello world. When we switch it, notice it now has this new class game, which has a game board, has these other divs inside, etc., right? If we switch again, it now switched to this new div, which has our form and our display of the, so there we have it. That is how we're doing our carousel. Hopefully that helps. And I will see you next time, where we're going to try and get Redux to work for both our projects and our main linking to navbar, which is inside this app.js. So we'll try and get Redux to work for both of those next time.